Okay, Christian, today, do you mind if we go through one and then two and then a bit of three?
I'm in your hands, brother. Whatever you want.
Uh, all right, let's start off simple. Why Benihana?
Because I love Benihana. And my oldest daughter, she so fell in love with it that we came up with a term like Benihana happy. It's like there's happiness and there's Benihana happy. That's like a whole nother level. And then in my research for Den One, um, I found that there are certain places in LA where cops and criminals kind of all go and go eat. There's just certain spots, there's certain burger places, certain bars. There's a place called Stevens Steakhouse in Commerce. It's one of them. There's the place the Hopper is based on is one of them, and Benihana is another one. And there was a time when I went with some guys from the sheriff's department to a Benihana in Torrance, and there was some Mexican mafia guys there that were eating that they knew they actually had arrested like 10 years before, and they're sitting at another table, and they kind of gave him like a nod, and then the Mexican mafia guy sent a beer over to us. I'm like, this is just fucking great. While the
Wow.
teppanyaki guys right there, I'm like, okay, that's a scene. So there we go.
I knew how well researched this all was, but that was one thing that I thought was more of like a personal story, like you said with
Right, right.
your daughter. I had no idea that that had actual tactical relevance.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
So, to that point of your research, do you have a quote unquote favorite real robbery?
Oof, boy, good question. Yeah, I mean, I would have to say the uh well, it's a tie between what the Diamond Heist in Den 2 is based on, which is based on several things, but it's really the Diamond Center heist in Antwerp, and then another heist that Den 1 is a combination of was a thing called the Hole in the Ground Gang, which is the inspiration for Merriman and Company in Den 1, and what they did with the Pico Rivera Bank and then the tunnel below. That all happened, and that was actually a copycat. Those thieves copycatted a heist in Berlin done by the Red Command, communist Red Party terrorists when they robbed a bank to finance their shit they were doing in the 70s in Germany. And they did exactly the same thing where they robbed a place, but then actually were tunneling while robbing and robbing a place like 2 blocks away. And then that was also copycatted I think about 7 or 8 years ago in Argentina. But it all started from that one heist in Berlin. And then the guys in LA did it, and that was at a Bank of America. And that was really the inspiration for Den One. The Bank of America on the corner of Wilshire and La Cienega. And it was in like 1999. And I was on the way. This is so random. I was on the way with my girlfriend at the time. She was a tango dancer, and she took me tango dancing. And there was a tango dancing show at that theater on Wilshire Boulevard in East Beverly Hills, past La Cienega. It was a Friday night. We're driving out there, and suddenly there are helicopters everywhere, cops everywhere. It was so much traffic we couldn't get to the goddamn theater. We didn't see the damn show. And the next day, I read the news, and it turns out that was that heist from the whole. And I was just starting to write Den at the time, and I'm like, oh shit. And I was familiar with the Hole in the Ground gang from some friends of mine at the FBI, and I'm like, oh my god, that's that fucking crew. Anyway, so that and then what the Den 2 World Diamond Center heist is based on, I'd say those two. Just
Have
because
you
just because of the tact, the precision, the time it took the thieves, like the planning, like the logistics were like crazy. It's like, dude, how do you have the discipline for that? You sticking with this thing for months, and like, man, I mean, it's like a lot of work.
I'm a huge heist crime film guy. I'm sure Heat is a touchstone for you and
Hmm.
tons of guys out there. Mine is the Town, and I just had looked up over the years bank heists that haven't been really told in film or on shows. Have you heard of the Northern Bank heist that they think that the IRA pulled off in Belfast?
Yeah, refresh my memory again.
It was 2004. Basically, they took people who worked there's family hostage, and then I'm pretty sure
Yes,
they just like took their gear, donned it, and then went in.
right. And they took a hostage in their homes and then went in,
Yes.
and they kept their families under guard and under a gunpoint, and
Yep.
then yeah, sure, yeah, that's great. That's a
Yeah.
good one. That's a good one.
So anyway, yeah,
Yeah,
that's just one that I've come
yeah, that's
across.
cool.
So do you know, or have you noticed? This is a bit of a stretch, but it's a fun one. Have you noticed any similarities between planning a bank heist and directing a film?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, it's a lot of logistics, right? A lot of you got it's all in the planning, right? And then it's like a sport too, right? It's like preparing for a game. It's like it's all in the preparation, it's all in the training and like preparing for the big fight. Right? It's the weeks and weeks and months of your diet and training and building up to it, and then the night of, it's or when you're rolling camera, it's like you're only able to do that. You're only able to go in the ring. You're only able to go in the field and play because you've done all the training. Your coaches have coached you up, and it's all the work you did ahead of time. And the heist, same thing, right? You're only able to do it if you've done all the homework, right? Which takes the
Yeah,
longest.
yeah.
And then the thing itself is such a short, finite amount of time. Another thing that's sort of interesting about criminals, and when I've hung out with so many, I'm friends with so many of them, and research for both of these movies, is that it's a trip to think that in a criminal, quote unquote, their life, the vast majority of their life, they're not doing anything criminal, but they do this criminal act that's a very tiny, short little period of time. It's like this little boom, it's like this an hour or two or whatever, right? And that's it. The rest of their lives they're living, they're normal citizens, aren't doing anything quote unquote illegal or wrong. And it's like this one little moment of time, they're doing this one thing that can potentially change their lives forever, right? Sort of, it's an interesting when they put it in that context. It's like that's interesting, you know. And then suddenly they're known forever by being this criminal who did this thing. It's like, well, it was actually 1 hour out of their entire existence. It's interesting.
Yes, but you kind of get to that point of like it's something that you can't wipe off in Den One, where Ray says like, "Well, where cup."
Where cop goes, yeah,
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 so it doesn't matter what they did before, whether they plan to or
right,
not. That is what they are now and will
yep,
forever be.
yep.
Big Nick,
Mhm.
incredibly and intentionally unlikable guy, and yet you still like him. That's obviously a credit to the writing and Gerard's performance. I'm curious how you towed that line. And what I'm really trying to ask is, were there any versions of the script where you sort of pushed him too far into sort of that scumbag cop vibe? And what did you sort of do to pull him back and really toe that line?
He was always the way he is now, and that like I never meant to write him as bad, as good as anything. I meant to write him as what the fuck he is. No judgment. Like I try not to have any. I
What
don't write.
what would you say that is? What is he?
He is a an alpha, a true alpha, an alpha among alpha cop who is very passionate about what he does, but he's only able to. In other words, a lot of these guys that I've known, when you operate in that criminal world, like the world of cops and criminals, it's a world. It's like a symbiotic. It's like if you're in real estate, or they all know each other, and one only exists without the other. So to be really good at it, you have to be kind of a you got to be a bad motherfucker, like period. And of course there's a line, but it's always interesting to sort of play with that. I've met with a lot of cops who've gone on the other side, gone the other way, and and gotten popped for it. A lot of the guys from Rampart and all that, and they're hard charging alphas. Not that they believed in upholding the law and all that, but in the process thereof, shit gets very gray really quick. And I understand that as a human being, and I don't judge that. I'm not saying it's good, but it's just they had to do what they got to do operating in that very dangerous world. That's just what it is. And like, who am I to judge? It's their judgment. They're in it. They're risking their lives doing what they do. Well, fucking hey, man. I mean, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Sometimes it's a very gray area. And it was always about exploring that kind of guy. And he's based on several different, law enforcement guys that are friends of mine, and their personalities, and then Jerry bringing his whole thing to it, and they all have great senses of humor. They're kind of larger than life in a sense. And there's famous cops from the East Coast that were that way, now on the West Coast, and you find them all over the world. I've got some friends in Brazil that are very similar. They're in the BOPI, the famous SWAT teams down there in Rio, and it's truth isn't stranger than fiction. It's more interesting than fiction, and like when you really meet these guys, it doesn't fit neatly within any box. I'm like, oh, that's a policeman and he's supposed to be like this, that's a gangster, he's supposed to be like this. And oftentimes the gangsters or the criminals are very intelligent, very well spoken, very educated, have fascinating skill sets. And for whatever reason, they find themselves in this line of work, not because that's what they set out to do when they were a kid. I mean, you do have those types who grew up as gangbangers on the streets that had no parental supervision. They were in gangs young, and you have those guys too. But a lot of the guys on the higher end aren't that. And they, for life circumstance, found themselves in this line of work, and they don't look at it like they're a bad guy. They're just doing what they got to do to pay the bills and navigate their way through life like all of us are. So I try to approach it without any judgment at all. I don't look at a guy, that's a bad guy, that's a good guy. They're all just people.
Well, I think that that's one of the key strengths of Den One. Bar the robbing and killing cops part, you could argue that Ray's moral code is more defined
Yes.
than Big Nick's. Um,
Yeah.
was there a specific moment on set where you saw Gerard performing and it clicked to you like, oh shit, like we really got something good here?
Yeah, pretty much in the first day. When the first thing we shot was when Nick comes home in the morning to his family and his wife leaves him with the kids out of the house. It
Oh
was
wow.
really that day. It was that was the first thing we shot, and like we'd rehearse it, of course, but then when you go live, it's different, and just right then, just the whole you know that scene was so well played on he and Don's behalf. They were so good, and it just he hit that note like you felt sorry for him. It was harsh, but like man, he fucked up, and he's big, and it was just real, and we knew from then on that we were really locked in on something.
You came up in the business in the 1990s. If Den of Thieves had come out then, who would you have liked to see star as Big Nick, Ray, and Donnie?
Oh God, huh, boy, uh, Donnie like a Jamie Foxx, Big Nick, man,
Nick Cage, throw like 30 pounds on him?
yeah, like they're like yeah, like Nick, that's a good call. I mean, look, Den was almost so Den first was going to be Wahlberg, right? Was going to play Merriman.
Mm.
Then Sam Jackson was going to be Big Nick. Then Stallone was involved for a while. Sam Worthington was in there for a while. Brolin was there. Um, I mean, it was Den was the first time it was almost made was with Wahlberg in 2008, and it was just the movie was at Relativity Media, which they ended up going bankrupt, and it was kind of just a mess over there. So, and then yeah, we had to get it out of bankruptcy court. But yeah, it was almost made several times with different pieces of casting. Dwayne was involved for a while, and yeah, but yeah, Nick Cage is a great call. He would have been great. He would have been
Those,
great.
those are good ones.
Like like Nick Cage, Ed Harris, maybe like Ed Harris kind of thing.
I
Maybe.
love Ed
You know
Harris.
what I mean? Yeah.
He's the most. You'd always I'm a Jersey guy. You'd always think he's like a Southern Texas type. No, Jersey guy as well.
Yeah,
But
really, that's cool. That's cool.
that's
Love
just
it.
how good he is. So the third act, Alameda corridor shootout is
Yeah.
obviously sort of the show-stopping set piece of the film. What's something that you could tell the fans about the process of making that scene that'll make
Mhm.
them appreciate or enjoy it more?
Okay. So first of all, it's really I approach all that from a very sort of militaristic standpoint or like an athletic standpoint. It's about reps, right? It's about doing the thing itself. So we had my technical advisors taking all the actors out and all the stunt guys out to a range that was actually a huge field. It was like somebody's actual farm, I think, a huge area with an escarpment on either end. It was like acres and acres and acres. And we went out there in about 45 minutes outside of Atlanta, and we set up the scene with all the parked cars and the whole thing. And we had blank rounds, and we literally drilled the scene over. They did the action, did the peel and the whole thing over and over and over and over again. And we shot it, we shot the whole thing and sort of cut it together and put together little rip reels of it, and just reps. We did over and over and over again. So by the time we were there shooting the actual scene itself, because we actually took over a whole part of Atlanta, and we got all these city blocks, and we blocked off for an entire week. And then, but it was, we had to really haul ass when we got there, so we knew we couldn't mess around. We had to be rehearsed and know exactly what we're doing, and be able just to do the scene fluidly all the way through.
I just want to cut in and give you praise for that, because as I rewatched Den this week, I've literally watched thousands of films where characters shoot and fire and it hits something. In this movie, I feel like they're aiming, and I have a tactical awareness of where they
Yes.
are and where they're trying to go.
Yes, yeah, and that was the geography of the scene was very, very important. That's also obviously how you shoot it. Like, I'm not crazy about shooting everything like long lens and find it in the editing room later. I like to very specifically understand the geography of something, where people are, where they're trying to get to. So that was all by design. And then when we got there, the crazy thing was, I think it was the second day. We were there for a week. We shot that whole scene, and then the chasing of Merriman, and then when Nick kills Merriman, that was all 1 week, right? I think the second day is when the second day into shooting the shootout, and suddenly all the ADs are going crazy, like, oh my god, all these sirens are blazing all around the city, and they're coming in our direction. And there was an actual active shooter with an AK-47 2 blocks
Holy
away who went into a fucking market.
wow.
And here we are, but they didn't know, the cops didn't know that yet. Here we are, all these dudes with automatic, freaking
Oh my god.
guns. So everybody had to put them down. The armors ran over. We all had to like run into like this warehouse. It was crazy. And the cops just swarmed the area. Helicopters came in. It was nuts. And then they found the guy, the active shooter guy. They found him like 2 hours later. Thankfully, nobody got killed, but he fired a bunch of rounds in some market, some Albertsons. And it was just insane. And we're like, how? I mean, just the light, the possibility of that happening, of like you're sitting there shooting a movie with guns blazing, and there's an active shooter 2 blocks away. I'm just crazy. Um, so that ate into that day. We couldn't start shooting again until sometime in the afternoon, which killed us. But we were able to do it just because of all the rehearsal, and all the time spent. Everybody knew exactly what they're doing. They had the movements down. They had the reloads. They were great at like changing mags real fast, and the actors all did that themselves. And we were really, really dialed in. And we knew I know we wanted that scene to be just real, visceral, and just a real firefight. Like, what's a firefight like? And well, that's about as close as you're going to get. And then all my technical advisors were there, or the real deal, and they were instrumental and all that. And just dialing everybody in. And one issue we had on the second day was also Merriman Pablo. His gun kept jamming, and like when we came to his coverage, he'd do these beautiful movements. He'd always get off, the first magazine, and he'd drop it, put in the second mag, bam, bam, and then it would jam, and like it happened like over and over and over again. And he probably got so pissed off, rightfully so. And the pressure was on the armor, and he just didn't understand what was happening, because he would do it offset and work perfectly and give it to Pablo, and it wouldn't. And so that was a big issue for a while. We finally got it to work. But when you're shooting movies, this shit happens all the time. Murphy's Law creeps up all the time. It's like that's just what it is. You have to work your way around it. But no, and then the other key component of the scene was the sound.
Oh
So
yeah.
when we were training out at that ranch leading up to it, so I had the sound guys go out there, and they put microphones everywhere, because like a mile off on either side of, or surrounding this ranch, was an escarpment, like a little hill. And so when they would shoot, there was a reverb, but the reverb was like 3 seconds later. It was so bitchin' sounding. So we recorded all that, and then of course we recorded everything at the location we were shooting. And when we went to post with our sound designer, the production sound was it was literally the best. And some of one of the Kamiasko, one of the best, sound designers in the business. He's like, that's some of the best production sound I've ever heard, ever. and we used all the production sound for that. You know, it was all the real thing. Um,
Wow.
and that's the real other key to that sequence is the sound. You know, it's just to get that right. So we really worked hard on that. It was about the verb that bounces off all the buildings in the surrounding area that gives it that extra kick.
Final one here on one, and then we'll swing to two.
Hmm.
Beyond, it's good, it's well made, it's intense, it's fun, it's got twists. What do you think the ingredient is in this film that's made it the sort of slow burn cult hit that become, if you really had to sort of zero in on it?
Um, I think it's just the little details, right? So it's the little lines of dialogue, it's the little character details that are all, you know, that I paid so much attention to. You know what I mean? And again, it all comes from having done the research and like hung out in those worlds and picked up on little things that are just fascinating and just jamming it all in there. You know what I mean? And like no leaving no stone unturned and just giving it life. And um,
Do you think it's a better film because of how long it took?
um, no,
Because you got to pick up and accrue more of that stuff?
I know you mean that 99% of it was done leading up to my writing of the first draft, really. And the draft, the only real changes between the first draft and the shooting draft were really just production realities of like where we were shooting it and like length. And but the first draft of the script, even going into the shooting of the film, it was much more, it was longer. There was a lot more to Pablo's character and 50's character, a lot. There were a lot more scenes, spent a lot more time with them. That's why we're now probably going to do a Den 1 prequel. Because
Oh,
there's so much more to 50's character. Everything was happening at home, like that prom scene. That there was lots of that led up to that. There was this whole thing that happened at his church with his daughter dating this kid, and Gus, the cop, also goes to that church, Baptist church. He also goes there, and they know each other from that church. And there was all this whole thing with he and his wife was getting mad at him because their daughter was dating gangsters, and like he's a gangster, and his wife's like, "Why the fuck do you think she's dating gangsters? You're a gangster, dude. Like she's dating her dad." So
yeah.
there was that whole thing going on, and then Merriman had a whole thing about getting out of prison, and he had PTSD, and he became agoraphobic, and he would go shop at Albertsons. So he'd only buy prison food, and there was a whole part of the movie that some of it got shot and just because of the dictates of time, the studio made me cut it all out, which is a bummer. But also just it was a little bit of a different, it was more of a drama, more of like an epic drama. Um, then it ended up being more like action, urban action heist. It was definitely leaning into like the drama, crime drama of it all, the first draft. Um, so that was really what was adapted in terms of to the shooting draft.
Have you guys started to really kick around a Den 1
Oh,
prequel
Dan,
or?
what? I mean the prequel?
Yeah.
Yeah, I already have. Yeah, I already have
Wow.
it. Basically,
Um,
scripted.
how far back, or from what you could tell, how far back are you going to expand their stories? Is it just like the months and years leading up, or are we talking
No,
they're
it's the end of Merriman and Ensign's military career. And there's this incident they're both involved in that's really heavy. And you see that, and then you come home with them, and it's really about the turn from a military life to a criminal life and
Yep,
why it's an exploration of why that happens,
love that.
right? How that happens and why,
Love that.
and the kinds of dudes that do that, and where they are in their lives and what leads them down that path, and
Yeah.
all the reasons, all the emotional and just life, and their camaraderie ahead of time, and you see them kind of slow burn into why they start becoming what they become.
Just from
um
my own point of view, like obviously they have their own personal life circumstances that force them down that path. But then as well, like they come home with this skill set, and it's like, what the fuck else is this skill set good for? Like I've got this
exactly right.
specific skill
Yeah,
set here.
exactly right. Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
so let's go on the two now. Whereas the first film I felt like had a very sort of heat to live and die in LA vibe, the sequel takes on more of a 48 hours a Lethal Weapon vibe. What was the sort of thinking behind that shift in tone?
So, as we move forward with the franchise, like I want to, there's always the overall, heist movie genre, Den of Thieves, of course, structure to it all, right? Crime, action, all that. We'll always check those boxes, but within that, I always want it to be something new, something else, not the same. I don't want to do a carbon copy of the one before at all. I want to always be original in and of itself. And so going into this, based on where I knew where I wanted Donnie to go and Nick to go, and their camaraderie in shooting Den 1, and then talking to them while I was writing the script for Den 2, I knew that we wanted to go down this path of like what would become a quote unquote buddy movie. And because Donnie's now fully realized in this film, he's himself. He's like, he's not pretending to be something he's not, right? This is Donnie like as the master thief, criminal, gangster. And how does that, Alpha lock horns with the Alpha and Nick, and what's it like for Nick in Strange Waters? There's a lot of humor to mine there, and then also really wanted to lean into the humor of it all, the fun of it, of that relationship, and what it's like for them in this strange place overseas, um, and there are a lot of scenes that we shot that actually didn't make the movie that are a bummer that were really funny. Um, there's one where they're locked. Actually, I posted it on my Instagram. They're locked up in a rent-a-car. I don't know if you've seen that scene. It's hilarious. But so yeah, I knew that we wanted to go down that road as sort of an extra, another layer to it all. And then in Den 3, we'll do that yet again. And the structure of Den 3 is going to be a little bit different. And it's going to go more of a geopolitical kind of world.
Okay. Do you have any touchstone films that Den 3 are?
Um, a, a little bit. I mean, I don't know if you know Sorcerer. Roy
Oh,
Scheider,
of
William Friedkin.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a little bit of Sorcerer going on. A little bit of Sorcerer
Well,
going
so
on.
because like I said, one is a bit of to live and die in a.
Yes, yes. I mean, Friedkin's one of my all times. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of Sorcerer in there. And it's just there are national bodies, and it's going to get pretty heavy. Um, and they're going to be, um, you know, I don't want to give it away, but it's going to involve, international espionage groups, et cetera. So,
Okay, so Den of Thieves 1, that's your first feature film. So there's of course that's sort of pressure. But then Den of Thieves 2, while you have the experience under your belt, there's that new kind of pressure, and that's expectations. Did your mindset change at all when making Pantera versus One, and how did that manifest itself in the filmmaking?
I mean, there's always, the natural, regardless, you want it when you're writing a script, you and your job, we all have the performance pressure. We want to be good at what we do. And so it really was nothing more than that. It's just, I was so confident in the script and so confident what we're doing. It's just about, for me, it's everything is the longer I do this, I think, the better you'll hopefully get at it. It's about bridging the gap between what is originally envisioned and actually be able to shoot that, right? So, production realities change things. And like there's this, when you're adapting what's on the page into the film.
Wrap here. Den of Thieves 3, did O'Shea ask you if it's possible for him to not get kidnapped in this one?
Yeah, yeah, seriously. Yeah, he doesn't want to beat around anymore. Yeah, no, O'Shea's going to be doing he's on a whole different trip now. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, man. Well, thank you for your time. Congrats on the success of the two films that have come and the two films that you've told me about. I know that me and plenty of film fans like me adore these films. So cheers, man.